It's great having you with me today on Paint a Beautiful Picture. Today we are talking about fault lines in families. Yesterday we talked about laying down a firm foundation. Today we're going to talk about things that can cause that foundation to crack and ultimately for the entire house to crumble, to be destroyed, and unlivable for anyone, including you or your children, which would be a sad, sad thing. In California, there is a long challenging fault line, the San Andreas Fault, which they believe ultimately, geologists and other geophysicists, that someday, sooner or later, there will be enough pressure underneath of that that it will crack and a good portion of California may crumble, fall into the sea, experiencing catastrophic loss of life and property. Just, it's there. And people chose to build things there, massive cities and large amounts of population. That's their decision. But if you live over a fault line, sooner or later, it's a high possibility that catastrophe is going to happen. The same thing is true within a family. If there is a massive fault line running through your family, and we'll talk about some possibilities of what that might look like, you can essentially guarantee that at some point, some catastrophe is going to cause a split in that fault line, and your family is going to suffer. Whether they actually end up being totally broken apart for good and bringing that level of catastrophe, or just there is loss of certain parts of your life or certain parts of your family, all of that would be tragic, sad, horrid, and perhaps we can help it today. Okay, so what are some of the fault lines that can occur within a marriage or a family that could lead to the disintegration of a family? One is, most assuredly, a massive difference in faith or life perspective. In other words, a strong Christian, a true follower of the Lord Jesus Christ who tries to do what he says and looks at the world from his way of seeing things, and an atheist who are trying to live in the same house and build a life together, that's a pretty significant fault line. A person who has been badly, horribly injured. They were molested as a child. They suffered a great deal of abuse, and they've never dealt with it. They've never resolved any of it. And someone who's kind of cold and heartless, like, will just get over it and get on with it. That's a pretty significant fault line because this person's going to need to deal with some things, and they're probably going to need love and compassion and support while it's happening. And this person is just going to kind of hard and harsh. Yeah, this is a big fault line. Massive differences in ways of handling money, ways of dealing with the children, or principles of how to raise children. Those are huge fault lines because the three things in the world that lead to divorce, the three significant ones are sex, money, and kids. Well, if somebody wants to have it 3 times a day and the other person couldn't care if they do it once or twice a year, they have a fault line, especially if this person feels like it's their right. And if they can't get it at home, they're going to get it somewhere else. That's going to tear everybody's world apart eventually. Certainly, if you can't agree about your children and you can't agree about money, sooner or later, that fault line is going to develop a bigger and bigger crack. And it's very liable to break the entire thing apart. There are obvious fault lines. I'm going to give you some of the less obvious ones, but perhaps just as dangerous. Either a lack of knowledge or a lack of willingness to handle conflict in a productive way. Any two people at work, at home, at play, at church, I don't care where you are, within your family of origin, who don't see the world the same, have conflict. It's just how it goes. I want this, you want that. The other guy wants this. Somebody's got to give it in somewhere, or that conflict, that butting of heads, it's going to keep up. If you don't know how to deal with conflict in your home, and all you ever have is this perpetual argumentation and butting of heads and difficulty and impossibility to get along, and no hope at all of coming to some kind of a productive conclusion, yeah, that's a pretty big fault line, though you may not recognize it. So, someone who just loves to argue, someone who refuses to compromise, someone who isn't willing to communicate about conflict, all of those things, that's a pretty significant fault line. It's going to lead to trouble. On the other hand, the person who is a bury their head in the sand, avoid it, deny it kind of a person, they're also going to cause a pretty significant fault line. Oh, nothing's wrong. We're great. We're fine. Everything's wonderful. We're so good. And there really are things that are not that good. I know a couple. He was convinced everything was wonderful, and she was very aware that there were things that were going on. And she would try to bring them up, and he'd be like, "We're fine. I don't know why you need to make a mountain out of a molehill." I always describe it as you keep sweeping stuff under the rug, and pretty soon you got this 2 foot pile of something under the rug. You keep tripping, and you're like, "Nothing's there. I don't know what you're talking about. I can't see anything." Oh, and it smells to high heaven, too. That person who's in denial, that person who just wants to sweep it all under the rug and act like everything is absolutely okay and we're good and there is nothing wrong with us, that's a significant fault line, and it will end up in time disrupting everything within the family unit because sooner or later, someone is not going to be able to hack it anymore and it's going to break. There is certainly the issue of sexual immorality. Someone who isn't faithful, who's always out in the street with it, whether that's a dude or a chick, it is irrelevant. When that lack of commitment and that lack of honoring the relationship that you have within the home, it's going to disrupt your home. It's a significant fault line. It'll probably tear it apart. Extreme selfishness on the part of someone. It's always going to be their way, and everybody else better bow and bend. And I've known a few men like that in my life, but I also know a couple of women like that. That's a pretty significant fault line. You need to look for the possibility of a fault line in your family's foundation. And if they exist, you need to do something about them. When there's a fault line in a foundation and a constructional engineer finds it, they often have to go underneath and dig and put up uh, support, actually shore up that specific area, sometimes putting in deep bedrock and cement blocks and just really offering support to that specific area where the fault line in the foundation was and rebuild or reinforce that foundation. That's exactly what you need to do. The challenge question of the day is, are there fault lines in our family's foundation? If they belong to you, you need to get to work on dealing with those things. If they belong to your spouse, you need to go to them respectfully and kindly and say, I'd really like you to watch this episode of Paint a Beautiful Picture with me, and I want to discuss a few things with you. And you need to bring it up kindly and say, I really perceive of this as a massive fault line in our relationship. And sooner or later, it's going to break our family apart. That's not what I want. I love you. I love our family. I love our children. I want to see this resolved, worked on, shored up in order that we don't have this any longer and we have a secure foundation and we can have a life together for many, many years to come, preferably until the day one of us dies. Are you willing to do the work to look at the possibility of a fault line, do what it takes to shore it up, and reinforce a stronger foundation within your family unit? All of this is for your own personal benefit, as well as for the benefit of your children and future generations to come. It's been great having you with me today on Paint a Beautiful Picture. I hope you are standing on a firm foundation of love, honor, respect, kindness, and mutual goals within your household. And if you aren't, I pray that you will take the steps necessary to have a firm foundation within your home. It's been good to have you with me. You may find additional information on our paintabeautifulpicture.com website. Additionally, you may watch me on Rumble, and you may also listen to a podcast on Buzzsprout or Spreaker, all under the name paint a beautiful picture. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. You may subscribe, and if you are interested in receiving notifications, please hit the notifications button.